You're watching Truth versus Hype. We are in northern Chhattisgarh, which is emerging as one of India's major hubs for thermal power. Build is the solution to India's power crisis. Build more power plants, mine more coal, never mind those pesky environmental concerns, increase power tariffs. But over the next 30 minutes, how each of those assumptions under close scrutiny is shown up to be nothing more than false propaganda and half-truths, raising questions as to whether India is even facing a power crisis in the first place. Three hours north of Raipur, lush farmland gives away every few kilometers to a power plant.
Government of Chhattisgarh intend to make this entire northeast Chhattisgarh as a big power hub.
How many plants are they planning?
In 4 districts, Janjgir, Korba, Sarguja and Raigad, 65 power plants MOUs have already been signed.
The legacy of an aggressive push to power that's seen a 70% jump in power capacity in just 5 years, 2008 to 2013. Today, many of those projects are stalled, or like this power unit of the private firm Lanco in Korba, only partly functional, a reflection of the darker side of that legacy.
So can I ask you that...
Ask the owners and they will cite familiar reasons.
See, number one is the fuel, both coal and gas.
Not enough.
Not enough gas and not enough coal. To run the existing power plants, the capacity plant, it's already been set up.
Okay.
This is number one. And number two, environment comes into picture when they're getting sanctions for the coal blocks. See, like Coal India has got a lot of coal assets and they're not able to mine everywhere because of environmental issues.
The reality of the crisis is vastly different. Blame must fall on governments and banks for fueling the boom without proper planning or regulatory oversight, and of private players who rushed in on the promise of a quick buck, fully aware of the risks. The monopoly supplier, Coal India, not known to be the most efficient in output, had made it clear again and again that it didn't have the coal to fuel the power boom. Like at this 2008 meeting with the Power Ministry, where they said their commitment is much beyond the projected level of power production during the 11th plan, and to consider this aspect while issuing new letters of agreement for coal supply. Partha Bhattacharya was the head of Coal India at that time.
In my time, I have kept on, every linkage committee meeting, I have written to the government that there is no coal available, so don't provide additional linkage at this point in time. But linkages were given. I would say that there is no reason, there is no reason for either Coal Ministry or Power Ministry not to appreciate that the problem of coal shortage was definitely going to hit hard, because Coal India has been clearly stating doesn't have any coal availability and linkages were forced on it.
Fortunately,
the then Secretary Power, and ironically also part of the new advisory group, denies any errors of judgment.
obviously, frankly speaking, I didn't expect that the response of private sector will be so huge. So to that extent, you are right. But then when you de-license and the sector starts looking good and people develop confidence not only on the developer side but also on the banker side, then obviously there could be people who could go on the higher side of it.
In a climate of recklessness, hardly surprising at the deluge of private players that signed up for new projects. Lanco, for instance, took massive loans to build 7,000 megawatts of power capacity. Today, 5,500 megawatts is stuck, worth 30,000 crore rupees. You know, Coal India kept sending out these alarm signals saying that we are not able to meet the coal demand, but yet all of you rushed in and started these projects. So the risk also must fall on you.
See, in business, this to happen. So there are assumptions they take. They're thinking that we'll get so many investors, thinking that everything will go smoothly, thinking that there will not be any problem on energy sector, thinking that Coal India would try to improve their capacities. Everything is on assumptions.
The total debt of India's power industry, roughly 3 lakh crore rupees, mostly from public sector banks. Gajendra Haldia, advisor to the Planning Commission, says the banks are as much to blame.
You can't set about power plants without tying up fuel. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. Secondly, I'm quite, disappointed or concerned that our banks lent money without firm fuel supply agreements. I don't think it would happen anywhere in the developed world. So the banks also failed us, and that's why they are in trouble and the economy is in trouble. If the banks were not lending money to power projects which had no firm fuel supply agreements, we wouldn't have come to this sorry pass.
And yet, the new regime's focus to tackle the power crisis seems to be to revive stalled projects, with demands from promoters to reduce their risk even further.
How to reduce whether to reduce the debt equity norms. Like today, 80-20 is the debt equity norm, 20 is the debt and 20 is equity. If they can reduce it to 90-10, straight away all the projects will be on track.
So the promoter only has to put in 10.
10. So that's
the rest of the 90 is borne by the banks, financial institutions.
Or on a convertible basis.
But it's already, some would say 80-20 is already very, very favorable. You want to reduce that even more?
Like I said, today's environment, when you're not getting investors, instead of stalling the projects, we need to get them on track. So we need to work out a one-time mechanism where at least for stalled projects where we can reduce the debt equity norm.
The other myth of the power crisis is to blame green activism for the shortage of coal, specifically the go, no-go policy of the Environment Ministry, the impact of which is much less than what is claimed. As Jairam Ramesh, the architect of the go, no-go policy, argued in this note, of the total coal earmarked for fresh mining, only about 15% fell under his category of no-go.
Still you are left with 1,55,000 million tons extractable coal in go area.
Which can meet your demands?
60 to 70 years.
60 to 70 years.
And so then you just no need to venture into
the no-go area.
Which are rich depository of biodiversity.
So why this red herring of no-go? When we asked the former Coal India chief, he said the real problem was not no-go, but CEPI, Comprehensive Environment Pollution Index, imposed by Jairam Ramesh in 7 critical coal-producing areas, which brought down the coal production dramatically, from 8% in 2009 to less than 1% in 2010.
In 2010-11, there was a huge problem created by this blanket ban on the expansion in industrial clusters, whosoever was declared critically polluted. And unfortunately, most of the mines which were planned for expansion fell in those areas. So the growth slumped to less than 1%. Now, this was something which, if somebody would have done what is actually the contribution of the coal sector in that critical pollution, then possibly this problem would not have arisen at that time. However, this has taken time to get phased out. Now it has been largely phased out, but it took 2 years, and 2 years Coal India's growth rate was completely crashed to less than 1%.
But if you take
to this too, there is a counter.
They also impose restriction, but the restriction limited to 15 kilometer.
Right.
15
and that slowed down. Some of the mining did it also bring down pollution? Help bring down
only 1 or 2 power plant which falls within the 15 kilometer radius were held up because of that CEPI classification. Otherwise, most of the mines lying outside.
Even if there's a case for overzealous regulation by Jairam Ramesh, the fact remains that the scaremongering over green activism allowed the justification of a backlash, where instead of striving for a balance, the emphasis tilted heavily in favor of the industry.
This is the number.
Here is Veerappa Moily, the last of the UPA's environment ministers, producing evidence before us to demonstrate his industry-friendly record. How many projects did you clear?
I must have cleared, worth about 7 to 8 lakh crores. Maybe about, I have some number about 140
projects you cleared.
And, in addition to that, many other things which I have simplified the procedures. And, particularly 1 hectare of land, whether it is a public utility, the roads and everything, we decentralize the entire process, so that it need not be stuck up.
But this is the allegation that you were brought in precisely to favor the corporates, to override environmental concerns and create all these these projects.
You have not correctly understood my answer. What I said, public utility, the roadways, national highways, public utility projects, not corporate projects.
The myth of green obstacles standing in the way of growth is also the credo for another creation of the UPA in its last stages, the Cabinet Secretariat's Project Monitoring Group, meant to unblock stalled mega projects. So far, they have helped 72,000 megawatts of power projects get environmental clearances.
Issue is to evacuate.
Another breakthrough, they claim, is on the way.
These 3 railway projects that were important and were languishing for past 6 years on account of want of forest clearance. These are one each in Chhattisgarh, Odisha and Jharkhand.
How much coal was stuck because of these projects?
I'm told once these mines go full throttle, then there would be about anywhere between 250 to 300 million tons of coal becoming available if it gets evacuated as we're planning.
That's huge. That's I mean more than 50% of what Coal India produces, and that can easily meet the shortfall.
Yeah, we believe that once these railway lines are constructed, which they should be now by December 2016, this coal would gradually become available.
Far from raising critical questions, the new regime seems determined to act on the basis of the same myths surrounding India's supposed power crisis. By the time the UPA left office, the pollution index had been removed in 5 out of 7 areas. One of the first steps of the new Environment Ministry is to remove it from one of the last remaining areas, the Singrauli coal mining belt.
It's going to be huge adverse impact because you can see the
is this already a very polluted?
This is already very polluted area. It's a critically polluted area, Korba and Singrauli and Talche.
But with a government seen to be business friendly, the expectation is the revival of long stalled legislation.
It had also been clearly anticipated that Coal India alone will not be able to meet the growing demand of coal in the country. To my mind, we should have opened up private investment for commercial coal mining along with the power generation.
So far, there is little evidence to suggest private players who gained entry into captive coal mining have done a better job, or why Coal India can't improve its practices. But at least 2 members of the government's new advisory group, including a former head of Coal India, believe privatization is the only answer.
That is definitely the solution, because you see, then only you will get the best global practices. Because I think where we are lacking is we don't have the best global practices. Even in open cast mining, say for example, returning land in the original form to the society. This is something which has now become an established practice by the global mining companies. That is not so in Coal India. Coal India, the situation is different. They do fairly good, biological reclamation on overburden heaps, but that doesn't mean that the land is restored to original form, and definitely there is scope of improving the practices there.
I have seen the new power minister has ideas. He wants to sort out the short-term things first, and definitely he will look at the long-term. That's my assessment. I can't definitely say what finally will happen, but my assessment is that today the situation is, and really it should be like that only, we may have 20 actions to take, the Ministry of Coal, Ministry of Power and others, but they should prioritize. So that is how I think Minister is on the same thought process, and within few days and a couple of weeks I have seen that he has grip of the issues. So definitely you would see things happening. I mean, that's my assessment.
Coming up, a more fundamental question. Do we need more coal mining when 50% of the power India produces is not used?